Hello, folks. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And this is another Dump the Corruption show. In this show, we're going to cover the fundraising of Eric Swalwell and Peter Aguilar, David Scott. Those two are both of California. David Scott of Georgia, Mike Quigley. Where is Quigley from? He's from Illinois, the Illinois 5th. And Sharice Davids from the Kansas 3rd. So let's get right to it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to share I'm going to start off today by sharing the rule. Here's the rule we use to evaluate the candidates, any candidates, incumbents, and also challengers. The rule is vote against every candidate except those who won't take money from wealthy corps, individuals, PACs, or party committees, like, for example, the DCCC, something like that, and who repudiate all super PAC support. So that is the litmus test. Candidates who are acceptable to us can't take any of this money. They must repudiate all of the super PAC support. So pretty much they have to fundraise through small dollar donations from individuals, and that is all that's acceptable according to our litmus test here. So let me get rid of this and share next. The Open Secrets fundraising page. For the candidates who ran in California District 14 in 2022. That was a pretty safe Democratic district. We have data on the incumbent, who is also the winner, Eric Swalwell. You may remember him. He was one of those who ran for president in 2016. He is a regular Democrat, not a progressive Democrat. Indeed, he's a rather conservative Democrat. He raised $3.7 million for this race, spent $3.6 million, came out with cash on hand of $628,600. There was no data on his primary opposing candidate, whose name was Allison Hayden, who was a Republican. This was a pretty safe district. There was some outside spending. Swalwell had $1175 supporting him in outside spending. Allison Hayden was opposed by $8 in outside spending. There was some spending for the old incumbent, Jackie Spear, and she had $8 in independent outside spending, but she was not running anymore Only Swalwell was running. So let's take a look at the candidates page. That tells us a lot more about what was going on. Swalwell got 69.3% of the vote. He had 681,000 in small individual contributions. He had large individual contributions greater than $200, 2,512,871, 67% of what he raised. He had PAC contributions of $581,024. So he failed the litmus test, both on grounds of his large individual contributions and his PAC contributions. That is quite clear. There's no data for anybody else who was in the race. They had no data for Allison Hayden, no data for Steve Iyer, who was a Republican who ran. Also, no data for Major Singh, who ran as an independent, or Tom Wong, who ran as a Republican. So that's pretty cut and dried. Eric Swalwell bites the dust. I don't think there's any reason to spend any more time on Eric Swalwell. I would suppose, even though there's no data on her, that Allison Hayden got the remaining 30.7% of the vote, but I'm not sure about that. It is not revealed here. So let's leave Eric Swalwell now, and I will share the screen. We'll look at data for the other Californian in the race, specifically Peter Aguilar. Now, Pete Aguilar, just after the election, was elected as the chair of the House, the House Policy Caucus. This position is usually the heir apparent to the Speaker, or the heir apparent to the top-ranking Democrat. The top-ranking Democrat in the House, of course, the Democratic leader, is Hakeem Jeffries. But Catherine Clark is Catherine Clark is the House Whip. Sometimes the House Whip is next in line for the speakership. I should clarify, Catherine Clark is the Democratic Whip. But also Pete Aguilar, who I said, who has the position of policy chair of the Democratic Caucus. That is the position that was formerly occupied by Hakeem Jeffries. And it is the position that's normally considered the heir apparent, to the top-ranking person, whether Democrat or Republican. Anyway, Pete Aguilar raised $3.2 million, spent $3.45 million, ended with cash on hand of $1,579,756. He must have come into this race with an awful lot of money. It's a safe Democratic district. You can tell because Mark Porter, the Republican candidate, raised only $4,319, spent $67 and ended with cash on hand $4,251. He didn't even spend any money trying to win. Outside spending in support of Pete Aguilar was $7,025. That was greater than the amount of direct campaign fundraising by Mark Porter. So this is a very safe district. I'm now going to look at the candidates page to see how big the victory was for Aguilar. It was 57.7% of the vote. Considering the fundraising advantage, you wonder why he got so little of the vote, or I do anyway. I guess 42.3% of the vote went to the Republican. Yeah, 42.3% went to Mark Porter, who spent only $67 on the campaign. I wonder how he would have done if he'd raised a lot of money or spent a lot of money. It was kind of interesting. I guess it was just assumed that Pete Aguilar was going to win, and he did win. I'm looking at the source of funds. Small individual donations, less than 200, or less than or equal to 200. $374,641 for Aguilar. 39.86% of his fundraising went to large individual contributions, and they were $1,274,762. As I said, 39.86% of what he raised. His PAC contributions were $1.4 million. They were 44% of what he raised. He even did a little candidate self-financing of $225. And then there were other contributions of $138,000. There's no breakdown on those. I don't know where they came from. But anyway, you see that due to the large individual contributions and the PAC contributions, that Pete Aguilar easily fails the litmus test. So Pete Aguilar bites the dust. Let's see, is it worthwhile really looking at anything? The outside spending was minuscule in this race, $7,025. Courage California Super PAC gave $828 to Pete Aguilar. National Association of Realtors gave $6,100. And 68 Planned Parenthood Super PAC gave him $21. Planned Parenthood Votes gave him $8. Both of those were Planned Parenthood Super PACs. This was the $21 came from Planned Parenthood of Orange San Bernardino PAC. So anyway, that doesn't change the picture at all, of course. And Pete Aguilar bites the dust. So I will now shift to share the numbers for David Scott, who ran in the Georgia District 13 race. He raised $2 million, spent $1,829,000, ended with cash on hand, $636,610. Cesar Gonzalez ran for the Republicans. He raised $19,000, spent $18,488, ended with $601. Libertarian candidate by the name of Martin Cowan raised $2,402, spent $2,481, ended with cash on hand of $0. There was $213,093 of outside spending supporting David Scott from, I guess, a super PAC group, but we'll see more about that. Okay, a little later. What we want to look at now is the candidates page. See how big a victory this was for David Scott. 81.8% of the vote, so it was overwhelming, as the fundraising had been. His small individual contributions, get this, less than or equal to $200, small individual donations, $3,803. That was 0.19% of the funds David Scott raised. Large individual contributions he got were $312,875, 16% large individual contributions. That alone was enough to flunk the litmus test, but he also had PAC contributions of $1,690,525. A real PAC man, David Scott, 84.36% of the funds he raised. He self-financed $250. He had other contributions of negative $3,470. In other words, he gave back $3,470 to somebody for some reason. Cesar Gonzalez got 18.2% of the vote. He was the Republican candidate. He raised $2,828 from small contributions, $10,865 from large contributions. He self-financed $2,000, and in the other category, there was $3,317. So he fails also the litmus test based on the percent of large individual contributions he had. He wasn't taking any PAC money. He also failed because he self-financed $2,000. Self-financing is like a large individual contribution, so it is not allowed. A libertarian candidate self-financed $2,402. That's all he raised. Okay. Let's look at the outside spending from super PACs. Somebody wanted David Scott to win. He got $213,093 in support of him. Where did that come from? The Center Forward Committee Super PAC, that's a Democratic centrist group, gave him $125,000. The National Association of Realtors, 501c organization, was probably a 501c4, gave him $33,768. And National Association of Realtors PAC did outside spending on behalf of David Scott of $54,325. So again, David Scott easily fails the litmus test on grounds of his large contributions, greater than $200, and also his PAC contributions, which were overwhelming, 84.36%. It might be interesting to look at. There's PAC sources here. A little more. Business PACs. Business PACs were responsible for $1,482,714 of what he raised. Labor PACs, 129,000. Ideological PACs were 88,000. So that's it. There's no further data on who the PACs were, who gave him this money. But as we said before, he was a PAC man. And both his PAC contributions and large individual contributions disqualified him. So, next, we have And the failures keep on happening. They do. So next we have the Illinois Congressman Mike Quigley from the Illinois District 5 race. His was a Democratic district, heavily Democratic. He raised $1,053,624, spent $890,511, ended with cash on hand of $1,185,460. So he's been building his war chest over a number of election periods where he's in a heavily Democratic district, obviously, and he just kept on accumulating the cash. Didn't have to spend too much in this campaign, only spent $890,511. Tommy Hansen, his Republican opponent, raised $28,663, spent $26,617, ended with cash on hand of $2,046. And okay, so that was his. There was a little outside spending. Mike Quigley had $18 in support of him. Tom Hansen had $8 opposing him in outside spending. Probably a little money spent by super PACs, very little money on this race. I guess it wasn't a race that anybody expected to be close or worth contributing to. Mike Quigley easily won with 67.9% of the vote. His small individual contributions were less than 1% of what he raised, $7,874. His large individual contributions were 28.21% of the money he raised, $297,250. His PAC contributions were $748,500. So he too fails the litmus test. He too bites the dust on grounds of his large individual contributions and his PAC contributions. His opponent, Tommy Hansen, got 30.5% of the vote. He raised $28,663, spent $26,617, had cash on hand of $2,046. Small individual contributions, his were $2,313, or 8.07% of what he raised. His large individual contributions were $8,350, 29.13% of what he raised. His candidate self-financing, which is like a large individual contribution in my view, is $18,000, or 63% of what he raised. So he too fails the litmus test on grounds of his large individual contributions and his candidate self-financing. So Tommy Hansen bites the dust also. Mike Quigley bites the dust as well. You might say that Mike Quigley quickly bites the dust. Sorry, couldn't resist that. So, the last person to be considered tonight, I'm sorry about this. If I knew I would be able to go through these so quickly, I would have added another 3 candidates. I see we're only at 9:26 p.m. Here is Sharice Davids. Who won her first race based on identity politics. Okay, she's a Native American. Okay, the Democratic Party was throwing money at her in her first primary race against Brent Welder. in the Kansas 3rd. Anyway, in this race, she was the winner again. She raised almost $7.8 million. She spent about $8.2 million. Ended with cash on hand, $63,623. Everybody must have figured it was going to be a close race. She ran against Amanda Atkins, who raised $3.8 million and spent also $3.8 million. She ended with $27,504 left. There was a lot of outside spending by candidates. A lot of outside spending for or in opposition to the candidates. A huge amount here. Okay, we had Amanda Atkins, $754,741 in support of her candidacy. Okay. Sharice Davids, though, had $1,818,000 outside spending in support of her candidacy. So she had a great advantage over Amanda Atkins in support by the super PACs, or by outside spending. But also, there was $5,284,000 in opposition to Amanda Atkins, versus $2.4 million in opposition to Sharice Davids. So Sharice Davids had a very large net advantage. Let's see if I can do this off the top of my head. Okay, the net for Amanda Atkins was roughly negative $4.5 million. Okay, the net for Sharice Davids was negative about $500,000. So a big difference. A big difference. They both were negative when it came to outside spending, but Sharice Davids was only $500,000 negative. Amanda Atkins was $4.5 million negative. That, of course, is really amazing. Steve Hohe, who was an independent candidate, got $349,534 in outside spending supporting him. So I think this is kind of interesting. I'm going to look at the candidates page and see what effect all that spending had on votes. Sharice Davids got 54.9% of the votes, so it was a pretty close election. Small individual contributions to Sharice Davids were considerable. They were $1,256,000, 16.16%. But her large individual contributions greater than 200, those were $4.6 million, 59% of what she raised. Her PAC contributions were $1.6 million, roughly 20%. And then there were other contributions that didn't fall into any category that were $359,344. Considerable contributions for Sharice Davids. Of course, she loses or she fails the litmus test easily on grounds of the large individual contributions and the PAC contributions, and also the super PAC. Even though she was negative in the super PAC area, her net negative was far less than the net negative for her opponent. her opponent, Amanda Atkins. Amanda Atkins also, though doing fairly well with individual contributions, 12% of what she raised, she had $2 million, $2.2 million in large individual contributions and $577,000 in PAC contributions. So she also fails, okay, the litmus test. So both of them bite the dust in terms of the litmus test. But I got to look at outside spending here because it was extraordinary. As I said before, Amanda Atkins had $754,741 in support of her, but $5.3 million in opposition to her. So roughly a net negative of $4.5 million. And Sharice Davids had $1.8 million in support of her, but $2.4 million in opposition to her. A difference of more than $500,000, maybe $600,000 off the top of my head. So she had much smaller net negative and therefore came out greatly ahead based on the outside spending. Outside groups spending money in this race. Associated General Contractors spent $75,000 in favor of Amanda Atkins. Black-Brown PAC spent $12,500 for Sharice Davids. Center for Essential Information Super PAC spent $86,405 in support of Sharice Davids. The Center Forward Committee, which is Super PAC, $300,000 in favor of Sharice Davids. Champion American Values Carry Committee gave $50,000 to Amanda Atkins. Climate Power Action Super PAC gave $92,000 to Sharice Davids. Congressional Leadership Fund, that's a Republican Carry Committee, gave $2.733 million to Amanda Atkins. But the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee countered with $1.637 million for Sharice Davids. The Environmental Defense Action Fund gave $2,322 for Sharice Davids. Give Green United Action Super PAC gave $34 to Sharice Davids. Heartland USA PAC gave $162,800 to Amanda Atkins. House Majority PAC, which is a carry committee, came in strongly, $2.551 million in outside spending for Sharice Davids. The Human Rights Campaign gave $12 for Sharice Davids. House Majority PAC is Nancy Pelosi's PAC. Almost $2.61 million for Sharice Davids in support of Sharice Davids in outside spending. The LCV Victory Fund, I'm not sure what that is, but let me see what it is. Victory Fund Independent Expenditures. I still don't know exactly what they are. They contributed all over the country. They're very, very well done. Let me see if the summary says more about who they are exactly. Nope. No real data on who they are. Well, I'm not going to keep looking for that. I'll look them up later. But $650,000 is a big sum of money they gave to Sharice Davids. National Association of Realtors Congressional Fund Super PAC gave $631,000, and even though they're neither Republican nor Democrat, I suspect that their funds went largely to Sharice Davids. I would almost bet on that because I think she's been serving them and she's the incumbent. Anything else big here? The Republican Party of Kansas did $103,000 in external expenditure, independent expenditures. For Amanda Atkins, Shield PAC, which is a super PAC, gave $739,104 in support of Sharice Davids. The Voter Protection Project Carry Committee gave $349,534 in support of Sharice Davids. The Women Vote Super PAC gave $275,000 in support of Sharice Davids. So those are some of the super PACs that intervened in this to support Sharice Davids. Extraordinary outside spending in support of Sharice Davids. Who is Sharice Davids? She's kind of a standard Democrat, big supporter of Nancy Pelosi. She always behaves herself. Of course, we have seen from the candidates page that in the litmus test, she fails big time with $4.6 million in large individual contributions and $1.6 million in PAC contributions. So there it is. Sharice Davids bites the dust as well. So I'm going to consider your comments now. We have now, I should say before I consider your comments, we are close to finishing this brief survey of the regular Democrats that I've been doing, a relatively brief survey. We have now covered 22 regular Democrats. We have only 3 more to go, and I will stop the survey of the Democrats and move on to the survey of the Republicans. Of the 22 Democrats so far considered, not one has passed our litmus test. Someone might think, well, there's got to be something wrong with the litmus test. Well, of course, it all depends on what you want to have the litmus test for. I'm going to share the screen once more for the litmus tests. I can't find it now. That means that, of course, that I have to pull it up again. So I'll do that because it'll only take a second. Okay, there it is. Let me actually pull it up once again. So look at it carefully. We don't want people taking money from wealthy corps or wealthy individuals, because then we can conclude that they're representing the wealthy corps and the wealthy individuals. We don't want people taking money from PACs, because then we can assume that they're going to represent the PACs. We don't want people taking money from the party committees because we know the party committees wash PAC money. That is, the corporations, the wealthy, certain other PACs, wealthy individuals, give money to the party committees that basically wash that money. But everybody knows where the money is coming from. So people who are taking money from party committees are also getting bought. And then we have the super PACs. The super PACs may not directly support campaigns, but they sure do, through their independent campaign expenditures, either support or oppose candidates, even if they don't directly coordinate with campaigns. And by the way, usually, from a common sense point of view, they do rather directly support candidates because they use the red box technique. That is, a candidate puts an ad up somewhere. The ad is a box which is bordered in red. And basically, the candidate tells the super PACs what the candidates would like them to say. This technique was widely used in the Chantel Brown versus Nina Turner races. So Chantel could coordinate with the super PACs in support of her. So it's well known that that happens. So basically, if you want to avoid candidates bought by super PAC support, those candidates have to repudiate all the super PAC support and should be giving it back in some way. If they're not doing it, they're not behaving according to the rule, and the rule specifies the litmus test. So they fail the litmus test. So if you don't think this litmus test is reasonable, give me some reason why, but taking money from wealthy corpse individuals, PACs, or party committees and not repudiating super PAC support means that the candidate who's getting that stuff has not been bought. My view is, even if they haven't been bought at first, contest after contest, if they're getting that same support, they're going to be bought by the parties who have been reinforcing their behavior with money. So that's the litmus test. I think it's reasonable. I think that the laws, the election laws governing contributions, are far too lenient. They still allow the big money to buy candidates. The only way to stop that, in my view, is to insist that everybody accept only small dollar donations. And my way of having that happen is using the litmus test. Okay, the litmus test is not a test that appears in laws, but it's a test that we, the people, can impose on candidates. We can make not behaving according to the rule an original sin that disqualifies any candidate. And I'm saying we need to do that. So let me go back to your comments now and see what we have in here. Kay Ryan says hi. Joe Robert Copeland says another one bites the dust as we have another one fail the litmus test. Hey, Bob Copeland, how are you? And Bob probably wants to be called Robert Copeland, so I will call him Robert Copeland, but there's always a tendency to call a Robert a Bob, of course. And Lana Dell says hi all and happy Wednesday. Kay Ryan says hi, Lana and Robert. Robert says hi, everybody. Robert says another failure. Joe, I still think we won't get a Democrat that passes the litmus test. Well, I can't take the time to go through every Democrat. I'm doing a survey of 25 Democrats, not really randomly selected, but just there's no noticeable bias to me in who I'm selecting. I have a big list of Democratic members of Congress, and I'm just going down and I'm picking out some people to be among the 25. I don't notice any bias on my part in who I'm selecting. But I'm only hitting 25 Democrats because I don't have the time to go through the 210 or 212 Democrats who were there. I see I'm being joined by Dee Pierce, co host of Around the World with Brandy and Dee. Hello, Dee.
Hello, sorry I'm late, but we ran longer tonight.
Oh, I know you ran longer tonight. I guess you had an awful lot to talk about. I'll have to watch it after the shows. So, anyway, we've been through all the five candidates tonight.
Oh wow, did
So now we're doing comments. All the five failed the litmus test. The five were Eric Swalwell uh, and Peter Aguilar, both of California, David Scott of Georgia, Mike Quigley of Illinois, and Sharice Davids of Kansas.
okay.
So we went through all of them. They all failed for the same reason, at least the same two reasons. They had a lot of large individual contributions. They had, and or they had a lot of super PAC contributions. In one race, the Sharice Davids race, there was a remarkable amount of independent spending. And it was interesting because neither candidate uh, was benefiting from the independent spending. In other words, the spending in opposition to them was greater than the spending in support of them. But in that particular race, Sharice Davids, uh, in outside spending, had a net negative of roughly $550,000. But her opponent, okay, whose name was Amanda Atkins, if I recall correctly now, uh, had a net negative of 4.5 million in independent spending. So she was much more net negative than Sharice Davids. Both of them had very large campaign direct spendings, though Sharice Davids uh, had a big advantage there. The race was close. It was something like 54.1% for Sharice Davids to, what was it, 45.9%. Well, roughly. The remainder, okay, for Amanda Atkins. So it was a fairly close race as these races go, but it wasn't. Uh, it wasn't a few votes. So she won by a fair amount, but still fairly close as these races go. Sharice Davids ended with a big war chest. She got a lot of support from the conventional Democrats. Like, I think it was 2.2 million from the House Majority PAC alone.
Hmm.
They really wanted her to win. Uh, anyway, so I'm up to 916 comment from Robert Copeland. Joe, I still think we won't get a Democrat that passes Kate litmus test. So far, we've gone through 22 of the regular Democrats, and not one has passed the litmus test. And I've been saying to Robert that I don't have time to go through all the Democrats. So I've been picking out 25 of them to cover. I don't have the last three picked out yet, but the 22 who have been tested have all failed. And as we say at 918, the failures keep on happening. They keep on happening because there has been institutionalization of all major party candidates, Democrats and Republicans, taking large individual contributions and often, almost always, also PAC money. And of course, they don't repudiate the independent expenditures as well. So all that is institutionalized, and nobody is doing anything different than we've seen so far. Not in the survey of the 22 Democrats thus far, or the complete analysis of all the progressive Democrats, every one of whom failed the litmus test. Solana Dell comments, Robert, I received another Facebook friend request from you. I blocked that other person, but you should change your password. So Robert says, Alana, if you ever get another friend request from me, just report it to Facebook. Sorry, folks, my throat is feeling dry. Dee's throat was feeling dry earlier today.
Yes, I have the same problem.
And she was talking about becoming very scratchy, and I had just become very scratchy. But I took some tea, and looks like it's working better now. Robert says, thank you for telling me. I should say for a person to hack my account on Facebook has really poor security. Robert Coleman says, they spent a lot of money on that race. You mean on that Sharice Davids race? Yeah. There was a lot of big money in that race. I didn't add up all the money, direct and indirect, but I figure it must have been $15 million they spent on that race. That was in contrast to some of the other races. They spent very little money. In 3 of the races that we covered tonight, there was very little money spent. In the 4th race, there was a moderate amount spent, but in that 5th race, whoa, it was big. Steve says, Robert, my Facebook hacked as well. I'm still trying to sort that out. If an FB friend asks for your phone number in Messenger, do not give it to him. Steve Wolfman says, of course, as Facebook controls Messenger and Instagram, those were hacked as well. Steve says another one bites the dust. Doc, can you look into RFK Jr.'s finances? Yes, I can. I've been meaning to do that. See, he may not have anything reported to open secrets yet, but I will look it up and see. I've been very curious about that. Very curious. My guess would be that RFK is probably going to take money anywhere he can get it, because that's been the practice of the Kennedy family. But let's see. We'll see what happens. They also have many old friends who were big spenders in campaign contributions. And so there might be a lot of large individual contributions to RFK's campaign, greatly exceeding the $200 boundary. Steve says, I'm starting to like his candidate as I learn more about his policies. Yeah, so am I. I'm starting to like his candidate a lot, his candidacy a lot. I've been more impressed with Marianne Williamson also as I explore her views on Israel and Palestine. I haven't really seen her talk about Ukraine yet. I have the idea on the surface that when it comes to Ukraine, she's really terrible. But I have to investigate and see that for myself. Steve Wolfman says, Lana, the people that hacked my FB account also attacked my FB friends. Be careful out there. Once they hack you, they pretend to be your friends and hack them too. Lana says, I can change my password. Anyway, I would also like to know who is funding Marianne Williamson. I would like to know who is funding Marianne Williamson also. Uh, Robert says, have you done Nancy Pelosi yet? Uh, I think we did Nancy Pelosi one time. I don't remember. Hang on a second, Robert. Okay, let me see if I did Nancy Pelosi in this round of 22. I did Debbie Wasserman Schultz. No, I did not do Nancy Pelosi. So I suppose Nancy Pelosi is fair game. We know that she's going to fail the litmus test, but I suppose that I ought to put her up there. So I still have 3 Democrats left in the survey. So I suppose I'll put up Nancy Pelosi for next time. And we can see, but I can tell you right now, she's certainly going to bite the dust when it comes to the litmus test. If anybody bites the dust, she's going to bite the dust. Steve Wolbrand said RFK is pretty good on Ukraine. Yes, I had that impression that he was pretty good on Ukraine. And Steve says MW2 woo-woo for me, not a serious candidate. Steve, for some time, I had that impression. I think the impression comes from where she's come from, that she's come from the spiritual side. Okay, there was an old expression for that also, where they would call some people fuzzy bunnies. I had that impression, of Marianne Williamson. Steve Wolfman asks whether insider training counts. I don't know. I don't know who's guilty of insider trading. I don't know if RFK is guilty of insider trading, or whether Marianne Williamson is guilty of insider trading. The only one I can think of who was guilty of insider trading was Martha Stewart. And I'll bet you Donald Trump has done some insider trading too, but he was
Well,
never.
Nancy Pelosi does the insider trading.
Yeah. Yeah, does insider trading count? Yeah, Nancy Pelosi does the insider trading, I'm quite sure. So anyway, I've been looking at Marianne Williamson more and what she says. I have this take on Marianne Williamson and also an RFK. And my take simply is that if they're going to run in the Democratic primaries, then I want them to make a commitment that if those primaries are rigged against them, that after the primary is over, and if and when they lose, they just keep running, as independents. Now, I know that in order to do that, they would be viewed as violating their pledge to the Democratic Party not to do that. Thank you, Steve. I see that now. Okay, now I know people will view this, certainly the Democrats will say, that they violated their pledge, to the Democratic Party. But it seems to me a contract is a two-way thing. if one side of the contract violates the contract by cheating, by rigging the primary, the other side of the contract, at that point, the contract becomes null and void. And the other side of the contract is free to do whatever they want, both legally and morally. So that's the way I feel about it. If the conventional Democrats are able to win from RFK or Bernie or whoever runs without rigging, then maybe the pledge should hold. But I think if we independent people are to support anybody with our money, with our time, with our emotional commitments, they need to be loyal to the not me, us movement. And that means if they get cheated, they have to keep on running. To me, this is only common sense. Maybe MW can cast a spell on Putin. Well, maybe, but why does she have to cast a spell on Putin? What's wrong with Putin? His country was threatened by a consistent but very aggressive campaign to surround his country with hostile powers. He decided to stop the last move of this kind by invading that country. I don't see that the United States would have done anything differently if we were in the same situation. It was we, of course, who motivated the surrounding of Russia by hostile powers.
The only thing is, we would have been less patient.
Yeah,
I always believed Putin was very patient.
I completely agree, we would have been far less patient, far less patient. Okay. In fact, we were far less patient. The instant they put in those missiles in Cuba, we created a nuclear crisis immediately.
Yeah, that's the U.S.
Yeah. And by the way, I think we did the right thing in the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Hmm.
I think Kennedy handled that extremely well. I think that Putin handled this crisis extremely well. He did not resort to nuclear weapons. He still maintains that he's not going to use nuclear weapons on anyone unless they threaten the very existence of Russia.
Right, and that is being understanding, being a good diplomat. I mean, the U.S. now, forget about it.
Yeah. So I don't think that Marianne Williamson has to cast a spell on
But
Putin.
but she's not that type of her beliefs. And yes, she's spiritual, but she wrote that book, Return to Love, and it was based on A Course in Miracles.
Yes. Yes, it was. But also, I'm not so much concerned with that. She's not running as a religious candidate.
No, she's not.
She's running as a secular candidate. Uh, she has a platform that's a very, very good platform, apparently close to being as good as Bernie Sanders's platform was, maybe being as good as Bernie Sanders. I say close to because I don't think she has a detailed statement of her platform yet. I'm looking at Bernie's 2020 platform, with all the detail. And I'm saying, okay, that Marianne doesn't have that yet. She's obviously trying to inherit the mantle, okay, of Bernie. Uh, but I'm not willing to have another Bernie who's going to cave to the Democrats.
No, that's the last thing we need. There was so much energy was put into Bernie. You know, people. I mean, I know how I felt, and a lot of people felt the same way, and it was just the crash afterwards. Yeah, you just don't want to go through that again, and you just want somebody
Not
that's
only
going to
don't I
do their
want to go
word.
through that again, but I think that Bernie was wrong not to put his decision to a vote of his supporters. I think if he had his supporters, the us in not me us would have told him to go on fighting until the very end.
Yes.
And I believe that's what he should have done. But he didn't do that for a very practical reason. He wanted his committee chairmanships, and he thought that he could do some good, okay, as the chairperson of, well, now it's turning out to be the Help Committee, which is extremely important for his major crusade, which is healthcare for all. So he still is trying to be as helpful as possible. But my own personal opinion is that it was the wrong decision. He should have accepted the mantle of the head of the Not Me Us movement and fought for that movement and created a third party out of that particular movement.
Yes, he had the people where he could have done that.
I think he could have done it. I think he should have done it. Uh, okay, if he had done it, well, why, one can say Trump, might have won, but I'll tell you this: even if Trump had won, we wouldn't be in the nuclear disaster risk situation we are right now in Ukraine.
Hmm.
And you have to look, at Biden's presidency and say, uh, even though he did some good things, that by and large, he has been terrible. He has missed so many opportunities. He has gotten us into a foolish war and risked all our lives in this particular war. I mean, he is a disaster.
Definitely. And we know his history. We know how he is. This
Yes.
is Joe, the Joe we know.
He's still the Joe we know. We hope that he might be different, but he is still the unfortunate Joe we know. So Steve says, how dare they put their country so close to our military bases? Robert says, once any nation uses nuclear weapons, will most likely be destroyed.
Mm.
Okay, in a counterattack. Most likely the world will be destroyed, okay, in a counterattack. I mean, with each nation having, I think the Russians have more warheads than we have. They're supposed to have 2,000. We're supposed to have 1,600. But with 2,000 warheads and 1,600 warheads, the world is gone. Steve says MW got zero traction last time past his prologue. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. She did get zero traction last time. But this time is different. One of the reasons is Biden is running again and his presidency has been so terrible. I think people are really, really, really unhappy with it. Steve says NW could make the $1 trillion crystal. Robert Copeland says the last time nuclear weapons were used in a war, only the United States had nuclear weapons, but now a lot more countries have nuclear weapons.
Hmm.
Yes, that is true. Steve says, but Joe likes ice cream. Yeah, I'm sure Marianne likes ice cream too. I'm sure Robert likes ice cream too. I'm sure even Donald likes ice cream. I'll bet you even DeSantis likes ice cream. So there it is. So there it is for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow night with our neoliberalism show. How will Americans react to the end, of neoliberalism? And I think we're coming upon part 3 of that show. I think last week was part 2. So we're on part 3 now. And we've got a lot to consider because even though neoliberalism has failed, and even though we may be close to the end of it, in considerable part due to the success of MMT in getting its message out there, I think there's still a long way to go. As long as you have people in Congress who are saying, we can't afford Medicare for all, we can't afford to eliminate student debt, we can't afford to do a universal job guarantee. We can't afford to create these child tax credits. We can't afford to have paid family leave. We can't afford to do the Green New Deal. As long as we have people saying the United States can't afford to do something, we know that the old tropes of neoliberalism are still here because we can afford to pay for anything that's for sale in US currency that our people need. We can afford anything that's for the public purpose. Robert Copeland says nuclear weapons are a lot more powerful than back in World War II. And Steve says, Robert, by a factor of 1,000. Yes. So again, I think that's it, Dee. I thank you for coming for the last part of the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's been fun. So what did you and Brandy talk about after I left?
We continued on with, she brought up information about the population, about the amount of Jewish people, Christian people, demographics, and Muslims, and going way back when to the 1800s and going forward. And we just were talking about that. And I mean, obviously, you can't change the past, but had it been done differently, in a more peaceful way, more people were coming over there, and they were coming over there. They could have just kept it, the
Well,
way
there
it
was
was
a
wanted.
factor there at the time of the wars of 1947-48.
Yes, that's when it went up high, the
Uh,
change in population.
there was a big British factor there. At first, they wanted to hold on to the mandate, and they were deliberately dividing the Jewish communities and the Arab communities there. They were revving up the hostility,
Yeah.
using their traditional techniques of playing off people that had some disagreements. And they were a big factor in igniting the hostilities between the Arabs and the Jews.
It's just terrible. And from what I understand, in different areas over there as well, um, when the U.S. and British go in and where the Sunnis and the Shiites got along fine, everything was fine. And then you have outsiders coming in and starting that whole splitting people up,
Yes. Yeah, right. And
causing
that's
rifts.
been a favorite tactic of colonial powers forever.
Mm-hmm.
And the British were doing that in Palestine after the war because they wanted to retain control. Okay, the Jews wanted them out, and I think the Arabs wanted them out too. Okay, but they wouldn't go. Then the Jewish terrorists started taking a hand by bombing the King David Hotel. That was really a key incident in driving the British out, and the
Yes, it was.
British basically throwing up their hands and saying, "Hey, we can't really do this anymore." Anyway, a few more comments. People still believe raising the minimum wage will automatically raise prices, inflation. He says, my streets are full of homeless people. They're everywhere. Robert says, we have a huge housing crisis in California, which is causing a lot more homeless people. Yeah. People still believe the $2,000 split up between Trump and Biden during the height of COVID was government overspending, which caused the inflation. Some people still believe that
Mm-hmm.
because the MMT message has still not spread to inflation. So you've got those neoliberal tropes. You still have people who believe in monetarism, think the only way to control the inflation was to raise interest rates, not understanding that one of the things that could happen if you raise interest rates was that you could be feeding the inflation, which certainly the Federal Reserve has been doing. And then, of course, the administration goes and provokes the Russians into starting a war, wants the war to weaken Russia, and is not concerned about any inflation that might cause here. That was the administration's doing. Right now, a lot of the inflation we're seeing is the fault of administration foreign policies. Robert Copeland, Steve, same thing up here. Lon, I'm so tired of these narratives. Also, the free market fruitcakes, Lord, they are so delusional. Yeah. Steve says, Doc, you should go back and watch the conversation after you left. It was very interesting. Yes, I will. Thank you, Steve. I certainly will go back and watch it.
And we could have gone on all night. We had to stop the show because
Yeah.
once you start getting into religion, oh well, yeah, we're talking about religion, but then when you get into with spiritualism and the spiritual side of the Kabbalah with Judaism and just paganism and going on from there, you just talk, not going over to Africa and you know the whole world is a mess just because of all this.
So Loudon says, okay, the libertarians seem to be okay with price gouging because that's the free market. They are against even temporary price controls. I have news for them. If you have a free market, that includes perfect competition or near perfect competition in that market. And if there's near perfect competition inside a free market, businesses cannot price gouge. It's impossible for them to price gouge because they would lose competitively right away. They would lose competitively. So, I mean, they're just off base on the theory here. You can't have price gouging when you have a free market. If you have price gouging, it's there because the market is not free. In fact, here the market was not free because the original price gouging was made possible by the fact that the supply chain was disrupted. In a free market, supply chains are never disrupted. Not in Adam Smith's model. Lana says, who has watched the Netflix series Transatlantic? Fabulous. I haven't watched it. What's it about, Lana? Lana says, when we would ever have that perfect situation? We never had that perfect situation. The free market is a myth. I mean, the free market is a model, an idealization created by Adam Smith. I don't think the free market has ever been approached. Here in the United States, when we were supposed to have free market times, there were all kinds of subsidies going to business in order to build this country under the Hamiltonian model. I mean, the government was constantly there subsidizing business. There was never a free market. Anyway, I think it's time to say goodnight. I will see you tomorrow.
Yes, you will. Thank you and good night. And please buy Joe a coffee.
Well, thank you. And please visit my Patreon account, okay, upon occasion. I really need the money. Please. Lana says, Transatlantic is about a true story about Nazis invading France and a group of people trying to help Jews escape. Oh, that sounds like would be very interesting. Steve says, I think inflation is herd mentality. Vendors see prices going up, so they raise their prices too. I think that's an element in it, certainly. A vicious circle. The company I work for certainly is doing that. Yeah, well, the people saw that price gouging was possible, that companies weren't getting burned for price gouging. So they say, well, let me try it too.
Mm-hmm.
So the government should have stopped the price gouging. It should have recognized that the supply chain disruptions were going to cause price gouging, and they should have thrown the price gougers in jail like they did in World War II. Again, good night.
Yes, good night.